Nothing in Deborah Jones's formative years could have prepared her for life in the us or
Before Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, or Sandra Bland, there was Oscar Grant. The current movement against police terror and for accountability and justice can trace its first iterations to this moment, when Oscar Grant was killed by a Bay Area rapid transit police officer on January 1st, 2009. Captured on numerous digital devices, Oscar's death would be the first murder prosecution of an on-duty Bay Area police officer. Before that would occur, however, Oscar would be murdered in the media and in the court system. It was a triple murder. No doubt, the murders of Oscar Grant tells this story.
"'Tis woman's strongest vindication for speaking that the world needs to hear her voice." Anna Julia Cooper wrote those words in 1892. You would think she's speaking about today. White supremacy and patriarchy, by definition, belittles and ignores the voices of Black women. Some of us are brave. A Black woman's radio program was a corrective to that, centering and airing the voices, views, and experiences of Black women, documenting them and capturing moments in time. The program aired on Pacifica Radio for almost a decade. Many of those voices have been preserved here, and Some of Us Are Brave, interviews and conversations with sisters on life, art, and struggle. Edited by Thandisizwe Chimurenga.
So, yeah, peace, greetings, good evening, good afternoon, good night, depending on where y'all are. My name is Thandisizwe Chimurenga, and this is Rootwork, not Rootwork, Rootwork here on Black Liberation Media. Please, before we get started, like, share, and subscribe. Like the video. I know you ain't watched it yet. Go on and do it and get it out the way. It don't cost you nothing. Like the video. Share the link to the video. Subscribe to Black Liberation Media. Subscribe to the Patreon. Subscribe to Rootwork here on YouTube. Do all of those things. They really don't cost you much of anything, if they cost you at all. So, yeah, one of the things that I say about Rootwork, it ain't a Rootwork show if it ain't no technical difficulties. Now, I know some people call that a self-fulfilling prophecy. They say, well, you speaking it into being. Baby, let me tell you, it was already being. I'm simply acknowledging the reality. That is all I'm doing. I'm not speaking it into being, it was already being. And I'm just here to bear witness. So, speaking of bearing witness, one of the things that I do, one of the ways that I bear witness, is I've been involved in this oral history project for several years now. It's through California State University, Northridge. Um, the Tom and Ethel Bradley Center is where it is housed, Tom Bradley being the first Black mayor of Los Angeles. And within the Tom and Ethel Bradley Center is what is called the Black Power Archives. Now, it started out as a series of oral interviews on Black Los Angeles, specifically capturing the activists in the civil rights movement in Los Angeles. There was, some say still is, a civil rights movement in Los Angeles that was not only part of its own, but contributed to the national civil rights movement. And what I mean by that is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., for example, would come through Los Angeles lots of times for support, for financial support, for moral support, recruiting people to come down south, etc. And of course, we also know that there's the Black Power aspect of this movement. And so we gather interviews of various activists and individuals in the Los Angeles area. That is how I came to know Deborah Jones, the woman who testified against Maulana Karenga, sending him to prison back in 1971. Karenga, one of the creators of Kwanzaa, because a Black Power activist knew her. She has remained here in Los Angeles all this time. She wasn't hiding from nobody. She showed up at a Slauson picnic, or should I say she goes to the Slauson picnic. And that's where one of the brothers told us about her. For those of you who follow along and have been following along, you know that the Slausons are one of the gangs / street organizations that Al Prentice Bunchy Carter was a member of and drew a faction of the Slausons into the Los Angeles Black Panther Party. So whenever I hear about, see about, find out about oral histories, my ears kind of perk up. And the subject of today's show, Walter Riley, his most recent book, which was edited by Jesse Strauss, is Civil Rights and Structural Attacks, a conversation with Walter Riley. And this book, as we discuss in the show, is not so much a memoir as it is lessons gleaned from organizing. It's not so much biographical, but more of looking at some of the events and struggles that Mr. Riley has been a part of and gleaning what are some of the lessons that can be learned for activists and organizers today, specifically young people. And so that's one of the things that interests me whenever we're talking about oral histories, specifically also with folks who are activists and organizers. And I look to be doing more of those here on the Rootwork channel. Now, let's see. Over here in my peripheral vision, I see we got a piece of walking excrement troll over here. So let me get rid of that. Yeah, y'all know, don't even need to worry about it. I'm not even gonna hold you. It's gone. But yeah, so in case you are watching and get it in your mind that you gonna come up in here with some nonsense, my fingers stay ready, so it ain't got to get ready. And you can just type your little troll hearts out to the greatest extent of your desire. It ain't gonna be but 2 people who read it, and then it's gonna be deleted. So stay in your mama's basement or whatever the hell you trolling at, and type for yourself. Now, again, right now, today, I'm live, but this is a pre-recorded interview of Jesse Strauss and Walter Riley. Oh, Trump for prison. Okay, like I said, peripheral vision. I thought you started to say president. You was about to go to the cornfield with the other one. Oh, Lord have mercy, y'all are trying a sister today. All right. So let's get into this interview, shall we? Jesse Strauss is an anti-imperialist and abolitionist cultural worker, community organizer, musician, and journalist, born and raised in Oakland and Berkeley, California, on what is known as unceded Ohlone land. He is an anti-Zionist descendant of Jewish survivors of the Nazi genocide and was raised by parents engaged in radical queer healthcare and immigration asylum access work in the Bay Area. As a journalist, Jesse has a long working relationship with KPFA Radio, where he co-created the first ever daily abolitionist radio show, Law and Disorder. He was a producer for Al Jazeera during the so-called Arab Spring and Occupy movements. We really need to talk about Occupy on this channel, but not today. Walter Riley grew up as a civil rights activist in the Jim Crow South, chaired Durham, North Carolina's young adult NAACP, organized voter registration, sit-ins, job campaigns, and was a field secretary for CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, in the Southeast region. He became a San Francisco State University activist for ethnic studies and was a member of the Black Student Union and Students for Democratic Society, SDS. Riley has worked as a criminal defense and civil rights lawyer since the 1980s. He is a loving father and grandfather, and one of his children wrote the foreword to the book, that child being Raymond Boots Riley, who was a writer-director of the film Sorry to Bother You, and most recently, I Love Boosters, a musician, rapper with The Coup, and a producer from Oakland, California. So now, yes, the cornfield, from Twilight Zone, with the boy with the finger, I send people to the cornfield. That's where I send them. So now, this is about an hour's worth of an interview, and want you all to please strap in and hang on and see if there are lessons that you can also glean from this interview. But one of the things that stood out for me, so many different things stood out for me, was that Walter started out with the NAACP. And I think that the NAACP gets a bad rap, similar to what Walter will say in this interview about the civil rights movement, the way that we view things. Fred Hampton also was a member of the NAACP before his politics got more radical. When we talk about Robert F. Williams and Mabel Williams and the work that they did around self-defense in Monroe, North Carolina, when we look at Medgar and Merle Evers in Jackson, Mississippi, the NAACP, these are organizations that are vehicles. There's only so much you can do in a vehicle, but it is a vehicle nonetheless. If you are an organizer, then you know how to utilize the vehicle that you have to do the things that you need to do. I'm going to leave it at that because, in some places, NAACP was the only game in town. It might even be that way today. So what are you going to do with the vehicle that you have in front of you? Are you going to keep walking? Are you going to get in and ride till the wheels fall off till you can get to something else? This was not meant to be a commercial for the NAACP. I just wanted to throw that out there because I think that's one of the things that you glean from a person's history. What are the phases, the steps and the phases they've gone through in their activist journey, right? All right, so I'm going to hush and let's get to the interview. With me now are Jesse Strauss and Walter Riley. Thank you all so much for being here on Rootwork today.
It's an honor to be on the show. Thank you for having us.
It is an honor to have you, Walter Riley.
It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
I'm not ignoring you.
To be here with Jesse.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate you all. Jesse, I'm not ignoring you. It's an honor to be here with you too. You're my Pacifica comrade. We've been in the trenches. So it's definitely an honor to have you as an interviewee on the show, as a guest. Thank you so much. So I want to start with you, Jesse, in terms of what was your motivation for this project of capturing snapshots of Walter's experience?
Well, yeah, again, thank you so much for having us on, Thandi. I've been knowing directly and organizing with Walter off and on for a little over 15 years since the public response and rebellion after the police killing of Oscar Grant in Oakland in 2010. I've been had the opportunity and the incredible privilege to watch Walter participate in movements in a variety of ways, including at the grassroots level, at organizing meetings, as well as, of course, as a lawyer and a civil rights attorney, representing friends of mine and representing people in the community. Before even I met Walter, I had heard about his legacy and legend in the community. And, you know, over these many years of knowing Walter, it's been a real privilege to observe how he participates in a really unique way politically. And that is showing an incredible and quiet leadership. And it wasn't, you know, organizing with him for these 15, 16 years. I've known bits and pieces about his past and bits and pieces about what has led Walter into this role as a community leader and as a radical organizer in our community. And it is an incredible privilege that he accepted my invitation to be a part of this project, whose purpose is certainly to write down some biographical stories and get that, but specifically through those biographical stories to build political lessons for essentially, and for everyone, but particularly for younger folks. This book project is about building political lessons intergenerationally, as well as through political difference. Walter and I don't always see eye to eye on things. And I've experienced an incredible amount of humility in dissecting and dealing with those political differences. And one that in our radical political spaces seems very unique. So that's kind of the purpose of this book. And it's an incredible honor that Walter accepted my invitation. And I think it's going to be really valuable for people in the movement.
I called you Walter. I'm so sorry. Mr. Riley, you are my elder. Must respect you for that, as well as for your decades of actual struggle and work. Mr. Riley, I've been involved in oral histories here in the Los Angeles area with a lot of activists, and a lot of times there are times when it's a struggle to get them to talk and open up. Why did you consent to doing this project with Jesse?
That's a good question. I think about that as you ask it. I found Jesse to be an open and honest person. That was important, as a person who can listen and engage in discussion over differences and over agreements in a way that it's possible to analyze whatever the situation is that we're talking about or confronting. That I learned from seeing him in the street, seeing him in rooms, seeing him in meetings, and interacting with other folks. And that was very important to me. So I trusted Jesse, and I trusted many of the people around him, seeing what they were doing. I did not have an interest in being a part of a book project about a biography. And it's important that we know that the idea here was not to do a biography or a memoir in the sense of a memoir about one person's experience. Jesse wanted to talk about politics, which I love to do, and about organizing, and about what that means, and about interacting with individuals, groups, ideas, and systems. Mm-hmm. And I found that to be intriguing, and I thought, given Jesse's work, knowing his political background and sincerity in working with people, I figured there would be a lot to learn just by engaging with him. So I have not done this with other folks in a sense such as we're doing it here. And I want to be clear that I don't know that I have so much to offer in terms of my own experience and insights, but I think it's examining experiences and insights with anybody at any level. If we can examine what they've been through, what they have to say, and how they reflect on their lives, their work, their interactions, there's a lot to be learned. So I thought I'd figure out what's going on with Jesse and figure out what's going on with folks around him. And in that way, we'd talk about the people that I've been involved with. And there's a lot of criticism that I think that Jesse's generation will make of the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s. I can't say the 2000s, but certainly for all of us. And there's a lot of positive experience that can be gleaned from all of that. And the interaction between the two of us was an opportunity for me to engage in analyzing, looking back, reflecting, and figuring out how we move forward. So to that extent, the little that we can offer, it's worth it just because on any level, when people dig into their relationships, there's something that can be gleaned.
Mm-hmm. Okay, absolutely. So we're talking about civil rights and structural attacks, conversations with Walter Riley, which has been edited by Jesse Strauss, published by Legacy Left Publishers, just came out within the last month, June 23rd. So, Mr. Riley, I wanted to ask you, in the introduction to the book, where Jesse asks, and Walter, Mr. Riley, you say, you refer to the overall strategy of the civil rights movement as structural attacks on racial capitalism. What do you mean by structural attacks?
Well, I wanted to emphasize for all that there has been a media capture, major media capture, legacy media, I guess it's being called now. Historians, legacy historians, maybe there's another word for describing those folks who find ways of rationalizing and maintaining the capitalist imperialist empire and its ideology, its background, its structure of support. There's been a criticism or an analysis, if not criticism, but an attempt to color the civil rights movement as integration, as moving into the system, as folks who wanted to deal with just the social relationships between folks. And it has had an impact in major historical groups. Southern Historical Society of Historians, of course, have one view of that. If there's such a thing as a Northern Historical Society, there's certainly the Northern historians, the liberal that maintain supports for these systems. There's this approach that we were only dealing with how we moved into a system of racial capitalism at best. And at worst, it's usually characterized as wanting to be just a part of the American society. And that's not what happened. That's not historically what's happened, even if people didn't always have the right language for describing what they were going through. Because at many times we develop the language to describe our own conduct, our own histories, or our own experiences from other folks. We live in a world where we define something by the labels that are given, by the tools that we are given to do the work of looking, analyzing, or relating. And there's a struggle. I mean, you are a communicator and you understand that. And anybody who's listening here understands that communication, the language that's being used, helps us to determine what we actually see and how we see it in a certain way. But it doesn't change objective reality. And in this discussion, it was important to say that the civil rights movement was not about wanting to sit down next to somebody, or white people in general. It wasn't about us wanting to be part of white society. It was about us wanting to develop our own sense of dignity and be a part of the human society, to assert our own power, to assert our own voice, and to act in our own behalf, whether politically, socially, economically, to speak for ourselves. And what we were doing was changing systems. We were not just building a system. When we changed the system of segregation, whether or not we would allow such a simple thing as a white water fountain and a colored water fountain to exist, we were changing the nature of the relationships between people and the structures that existed that maintained those counters. We were fighting for jobs, to be hired in the industries that we supported and the industries that we wanted to move into. We fought for housing desegregation. We wanted a structural change in the way we were able to live in material society. We wanted to change the way institutions related to us as folks. And in those ways, those institutions had to be structurally changed. In that sense, we were attacking the structure of racial imperialism or racial capitalism or racial socialization. And it's important to be understood in that way, because I think any other way that we look at it denigrates the work that we were doing. Black nationalists in some groups talk about the work that we did as ending the power of Black people to have our own separate systems, without understanding that nothing that we're able to do and move forward and have a voice in today could actually occur without us developing our sense of power in this country and independence and being able to stand for ourselves. And systems had to change. So there are folks like who will say that they didn't get involved in the civil rights movement because whatever excuses they give, like Condoleezza Rice said that her father didn't, this is the Bush, Condoleezza Rice, did not want her to be involved in the movement because it was nonviolent. And she was, I don't know. This is the most, her whole history is one of supporting and maintaining violence, imperialist violence around the world. And she attacks this movement in this particular way. And while she did not have the courage to be involved in supporting those young women, girls that were killed, she couldn't be involved in the movement because she maintained her own ideological support for a racial capitalism and not to be involved in building power for Black folk, working class people, or community people, and changing the world around them, moving in her own independent way to become something important. A lot of that has happened. I know I'm going on because I get on my stomp around this issue, having had to deal with this for so long that we were attacking a nature of a structural system and a system of power that had to be changed. And in all our work, whether it was changing whether or not we could walk in a particular area, or whether or not we could go to a particular building, or whether we could go to a particular movie theater, or where we would spend our money, or whether we were asking for political change in the nature of lending, housing, and education. Those were structural attacks on a system, and that's what the civil rights movement actually was.
Now, you've used the term a lot today, racial capitalism. What do you mean by that? I've been hearing that term more and more in the last few years in various left media circles. A structural attack on racial capitalism. You told us why the civil rights movement was against structural attacks. But what is racial capitalism?
Well, it's capitalism that uses race to keep people divided, to get support for certain political positions. Racial capitalism can be used by the liberal media in determining whether or not people will support certain kinds of neoliberal policies or liberal policies in general, or policies that maintain the system. Racial capitalism is used to undermine the power and ability of people to build grassroots organizations by helping to develop divisions among folks. It is the way of white superiority being able to maintain its position of power economically, using all the resources that are available in this massive society. And it means different things for different people when they're using it. As a person who tries to make historical analysis, I would say that my analysis does not always agree, and I think groups of folks I work with do not always agree with more liberal analysis about what racial capitalism is. I think there's a movement now of talking about racial capitalism as sort of people just moving forward within this system and without confronting the evils of segregation, the evils of white superiority, or the evils of working class movements and exploitation. But for me, that's what racial capitalism is.
Okay. Now, Jesse, I don't want to leave you out completely. I do have, the majority of my questions are for Mr. Riley, but let me jump in here real quick. Mr. Riley, in your book, you talk about your background being introduced to the Progressive Labor Party, which comes out of the Communist Party or the communist movement here in the U.S. Jesse, your politics, I believe, have been described as more anarchistic. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So what are the points of unity that you as a young white anarchist share with someone like Walter Riley? And, in terms of this project, what is it that you have gained?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and take that young statement as a compliment. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned in the earlier remarks that Walter and I have political differences, and we've been able to discuss our political differences very directly when they've come up. That's been a very important and powerful part of, I think, why we were able to have these valuable discussions, because they're not just about reiterating something that we both agree on. It's a context of a conversation where we're trying to learn from each other. I think fundamentally, I don't know. You can ask Mr. Riley in just a moment whether he calls himself a communist right now, or something else. We've been trying to convert him to anarchism for quite some time. So, but the fundamental overlap is that we are organizing in opposition to the system of, again, as Walter described earlier and in the book, racial capitalism. We are organizing for something fundamentally and institutionally different. And we are deeply and significantly critical of the power structures that exist within racial capitalism. And sometimes in terms of tactical approaches or strategic approaches, we make pursue different avenues in terms of what we think is the best organizing strategy. But one of the kind of pieces that we're trying to frame the book with, and you brought up structural attacks as part of the title and part of the conversation that we had, structural attacks is also a way that we can kind of examine movement spaces, understanding that movements have a broad ecosystem of participation. And Walter was discussing, as we learn in more popular representations of the civil rights movement, we see nonviolence and civil disobedience, which of course are and were vital and deep and important. And those also happened in a context of all kinds of other organizing.
Right.
That included, and in the book, you'll read about Walter's experience as a young person in Durham, North Carolina, carrying guns in the community, which he also did later on in Chicago. The idea of a structural attack is a way to examine what type of strategic decisions are made in movement spaces that can challenge a structure, rather than being limited to a doctrine of this is our strategy and it has to be that. We acknowledge that movement happens in an ecosystem, and there's going to be people who approach that with difference. And how do we participate, knowing that we're going to have differences, but not throw each other under the bus? There are going to be people who are more focused on street demonstration and urban rebellion. And there's going to be people who are more focused on, say, voter organizing. And there are going to be people who are more focused on legal strategies. And all of those things can happen together and complement each other.
Right.
Part of the framing of this project is we're challenging the notion that any disagreement in that process should and can happen on the public forum. We should be challenging each other as organizers, but not throwing each other under the bus publicly. And we're gonna have disagreement. There's gonna be disagreement. It's not a functional movement experience to say my, and I'm using my not just as me, but whoever we're saying, my orientation is the only orientation that's acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that just before we get too far away from this, that Progressive Labor Party comes out of the communist experience, not out of the Communist Party.
Okay.
Very in differences with Communist Party as itself is what happened with those folks who were older than me that had experienced the Communist Party, and for the new left, as we were called in the 60s, coming to deal with the structure of our U.S. capitalism, racism, imperialism, the violence of the state and our communities. We had to figure out what were the structural changes that we had to make and how do we analyze organizational work in that way. So I think a lot of people became leftists, organizers. We know that historically that was the case, and many organizations developed as a way of trying to build something different with the idea of a different outcome, as opposed to being a part of a system that maintains the structures that exist.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of that, Progressive Labor Party coming out of the communist experience, not the Communist Party, I want to touch on some more of the autobiographical aspects of your story, not just that which is contained in the book, but brought forth in the book, and talk about. You talk about briefly about how the McCarthyism or the anti-communism worldview affected teachers in the South, how it affected the educators in the South, how it affected educators in North Carolina. But I don't know if this was you have to forgive me, the timelines. As a child, as a young, not even an adolescent or a teenager, as a child, I'm conflating stuff. Let me go back for a minute. Let's just stick to the communism. You were a labor liaison organizer with an organization called the Committee on Political Education. Now, this is in high school. I want to talk about prior to high school, but right now, two questions. What is the Committee on Political Education? But more importantly, how does a high school student get involved and become a labor liaison organizer?
Well, it's not because anybody decided intentionally. I don't think that anybody sat down and just, the COPE folks certainly didn't, because it was white. All of those folks in the labor organizational structure that were leaders were white, that in COPE, COPE. And in the civil rights grouping at the time, I was a high school activist, and I was the leader of the group in the sense that I had been chosen either through election or general consensus. I had this discussion with a friend just last year, and he thought it was general consensus, and I thought it was an election. But, of folks that I became the leader, spokesperson for the organization, agenda setter.
Now that organization is the Committee on Political Education.
No, the organization was the NAACP, or the Young, a youth organization of civil rights. We had different names that we called ourselves at the time. Okay. COPE is a labor unit, is a structure in the politics of labor itself. So labor unions have a committee on political education, and they do that kind of work. So I was the representative of my community, the organization of the young people and the young adults. The chapter of the NAA that I chaired included folks from adolescents up to their 40s.
Okay.
And before me, the president of the chapter was probably somebody in their 20s. Before that, all those folks were either college students or whatever. By the time I came along and became very active in meetings, discussions about how we move, how we organize, who we talk to, and what do we talk to folks about, and what systems are we going after. I had a voice around that. And I would say then out of that came my position of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
If that has meaning, does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
I think that the language that I try to develop is a language, when we talk about history, we talk about ourselves and we talk about movement, is something that has to do with more than individualism, but more what happens in a group setting. And the dynamics of the group itself is what determined that I would be the person that was speaking for the group, leading and negotiating with other folks. So that the person who went to the white organization and said, we're going to carry out a campaign this spring around organizing folks to vote. And we're going to carry out a campaign of getting working people's organizations to support this campaign. And there are some folks that are running for office from the Black community and running for office from the white community. Let's figure out how we can work with them. Or we would have a discussion about how can we, your group and labor and representatives expect to have us supporting your desires if you don't help us to desegregate some of the systems that we had to desegregate. If you don't help us get some of these jobs in these retail stores, if you don't help open up the opportunity for us to have jobs in some of these construction places, the chicken plucking, the chicken factory, or whether it was the cotton mill, those kinds of things that we were talking about, important industrial jobs that we had to get support for and build unity for. And as we know, labor has always had an agenda since the 1850s, at least in this country. And whether it was organized well or organized poorly, there were desires. And at various times it got better in organizing. And one of the times that it worked well in Durham was when there was a coalition of folks that started to work together. There's some history to East Durham that we don't talk about in the book. There's a movie that's called Frenemies, that talks about the coalition between Black folk and white folk around schools issues. The movie and the story doesn't use the precedent of what we were doing in East Durham, because we were knocking on doors in this very white and often considered racist community and getting people to join with us in voting against establishment politicians well before Frenemies came along historically. We didn't talk about that, Jesse, so just bringing up something new.
That's for volume 2, a longer book. Delving back real quick, and then I want to try and, in the time that we have left, move forward. You talk about that you come from a farming community in North Carolina. Your mother was what you could consider, I guess, what we would consider a maid or maid/nanny, a housekeeper, etc. But I was intrigued by the fact that you said that you were determined to earn your own money at the age of 8. Like it was almost like a little campaign for you to get your Social Security card so that you could start working at the age of 8. Why is this 8-year-old little boy so intent on earning his own money? What was going on?
Well, I don't think that's something that's unique to me. In fact, the history of kids in the South, and certainly in many parts of the world, but I think, even in the urban areas, kids were out trying to earn money for themselves. The shoe shine kids in New Orleans, or the kids doing the hem bone. We know those stories, we know those images, and that's what they were doing. And in the rural areas, when kids could go out and work on the farm, earn some extra money, they did. We picked up bottles and we sold them, and we did all kinds of things. So I don't know. That's particularly, I mean, I was motivated to do it. My mother, I don't want my family members to hear me describe her simply as a maid. My mother raised 11 children, and I was the ninth child, born in 1944. She was born in 1912. It tells you what happens, and that was not unique also in farming communities in the South, certainly not among Black people, descendants of enslaved folks. It is not uncommon for farming folks in Europe. Young people get married. It's part of the struggle of folks who have to live and fight for their survival on the land against powerful folks who want to exploit them. And that's this history of the world. And I don't want to diminish the importance of the struggle of.
Let me jump in and say I apologize if I was not trying to diminish it.
I know. Okay. I know. I'm not. I'm just doing this.
Got you. Okay.
But I wanted that. My mother was a farmer with my father.
Okay.
So sometimes people say your father was a farmer, but it's the whole family that farmed. And if you look at what happens with anybody who came from farming families, it's the entire family. And when you are a sharecropper or a tenant farmer, as they were in North Carolina, the landowner hired their whole family. They didn't hire one person to handle, several hundred acres of land or to grow the crops. They knew that they have something more than that. And there's a whole relationship to that. And that's a part of that. And if we analyze what happened to us as we came to this country to be exploited and how we were used, we have to think about that and not fall into our analysis in a way that doesn't understand the importance of every person there. So my family stopped tobacco farming in 1950, and my mother, to earn money, went to work in other people's houses. And so that my younger sisters do that also, and they quit school. My mother and my father never got beyond the third grade, which is also not uncommon.
Right.
I mean, right. When you do the social research, we know that that's sort of what happened. And they had a desire for all the things that they wanted to accomplish in raising their kids, and they were together their entire life from their 15. From their teens until they died. My dad died 3 years before my mother, and they were both 83 when they died. And they were together at that time, and that has an impact on how they help all of us to understand what's going on in the world around us, and that impact of how we live in a social, political, economic system. So you were asking a question. I get off sometimes. What I like is in these conversations. And what I liked with Jesse is that we were able to talk, and he would ask sometimes. I think it's in the book. Well, what about this? I don't know if I would agree with that, or maybe we should look at that particular experience in a different way. And Jesse's experience, my experience, and your experience, and everyone listening,
right,
and who's doing movement work, who's trying to live an honest life in a society of exploitation and degeneration, that they have to come into conflict. And let's talk about those things. And we are hoping that in this book, we talk about those issues. If somebody disagrees with the idea of what it means to organize in the streets or what some particular approach was, I'm down for that. I'm ready to fight.
Yes, sir. I am speaking with Attorney Walter Riley, based in Oakland, the Bay Area. His newest book is Civil Rights and Structural Attacks, a conversation with Walter Riley. That conversation was facilitated by Jesse Strauss. here with us also. I I have these interviews, and I just want to keep people forever. I know I cannot keep you forever. I know that. I'm well aware of that.
I have 2 hours.
Well, don't threaten me with a good time. Now look, now look. I want to tease out as much as I can for our audience what your history has been, and in the spirit of, as in Jesse, and the motivation of this book, what are the lessons that folks, particularly young people, young activists, young organizers, can learn from your 80-ish years of actual organizing work? So let's skip forward, shall we? Because I got to get to Oscar Grant. Y'all, I'm sure Jesse has told you, if you didn't already know, that is a struggle that is near and dear to my heart. We want to talk about Oscar Grant and the movement there in the Bay Area. But before we get to that, you have a chapter, actually. One of the chapters in your book is related to the nonprofit industrial complex and how capitalism uses philanthropy. Capitalism will use anything and everything. But I was hoping you could talk about your conversation, give us some snippets of that conversation for our audience. I remember you talked about the Peace Corps, how that came upon the scene, and Teach for America and the parallels between those two. So can you talk to our audience about your observations or your experiences with what folks call the nonprofit industrial complex?
Well, I would say that when we look at the developments after World War II and the world going through various changes, people were coming out of rural societies and living in urban areas. People were aware of a lot more of what was going on in the world. Communication devices existed that gave us a lot more contact with each other. It was not as easy for just military power to dominate some of the areas in the world without open conflict. It's costly, and it's a lot easier, as we found, that intelligence communities, that is, systems of government that wanted to control folks, either in terms of media, in terms of structural organizations, tried to do that in post-World War II in various manners, sometimes because it was not possible after all the carnage of World War II in Korea to fight in the imperialist powers to do that. So they began to use many other methods, and some of those developed. Winston Churchill developed this whole approach. We didn't talk about this in the book, but see, the Iron Curtain came from,
Right.
The whole idea of how to politically organize and control folks, using the threat of power and the existence of power and organizing, but using the powers, the resources that capitalism has to be more effective in winning, as they call it, the hearts and minds of folks.
Right.
And one of those things that happened in some places that learned from the various European countries, but is that in the U.S., the very liberal approach of the new Democratic administration, Kennedy, realized that we could call upon all these people in the United States that have tremendous desires for change and for a better world, and to add to the world, to do something, to change the nature of exploitation and the relationship to power, and that how to capture those folks. And one of the things that came up with was Peace Corps, and people joined the Peace Corps to go build wells, to get water to various areas, to build schools, to unblock rivers, and to fight various forms of disease that might exist and that would hurt communities. But they didn't organize folks. And folks were not being organized to go change the nature of exploitation,
Right.
which comes from government. It didn't come from simply people not knowing how to clean themselves, or how to dig toilets. It
Right.
came from the systems of poverty engendered by by European capital by and large, in coordination with individuals who were gaining power in those own countries. And the Peace Corps went and organized folks to do that, and organized many of those people to come back home with all the enthusiasm about how great American democracy was and the exceptionalism of being an American and a U.S. citizen. And when we look back at that, we see that that didn't have the results that it could have had if we had done something different. Some of that same enthusiasm is what made the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s that I got involved in so powerful. And a lot of the reasons people put themselves on the line because they wanted a better world, and they wanted to build it by working in their own communities to make that change. And some of us even joined the Peace Corps or joined those other organizations or joined governmental entities. That was one of the first experiences with that. And after that came others. And after that, particularly, I think, after another 20 or 30 years, the language, the systems of change and the system of education and philosophy helped to build the Ivy League colleges to bring out and develop, not just the Ivy Leagues, but most of the colleges to develop this whole idea of you want to do something for the world, go out and build a community organization, and we will find ways of supporting that. You should do that, and that's good. Those are all things that should be done, but they do not change systems. That is not structural change. And while we do a lot of service work, we do get jobs for ourselves and various people that we know, and that's all very helpful and does in fact uplift our communities and causes some social development, but it hasn't caused a gap between the least among us, as Jesse Jackson talked about, and those with more access and resources to close. In fact, it's wider than it was in 1960. It's wider than it was in 1950, even though all of the overall GDP was different in different economic systems. But so what do we do? What do we do around it? And what do we do, those of us who want to do that kind of work and make some change? And I don't want to, and this idea of the book is not to attack folks in a way that undermines their sense of self and ability and sense of work and dignity. I know that's true for Jesse, and he'll want to say something about that. So I don't want to have conflict. I don't mind people coming to a book reading and having an argument with me around it. I'm down for that, about what that means. But I don't want us to be in combat around that. I want the book and our discussions to be something that is, now it's the time for having a discussion. And this is not the first time it's been discussed. I mean, I've had this discussion with various folks, some of them major folks who have worked in building nonprofit organizations. In fact, I was chair of the board of the Vanguard Public Foundation, which was a group that was funding nonprofits and doing work in communities. And one of the things that we did, we've made a fight for it, is that we would not just wait for the people who knew how to make the funding requests, the grant writers. We would go out and dig into the communities, find folks who are doing work that don't write for grants, and find folks who have not looked for grants and try and give them grants, even sometimes when folks didn't think that that was the thing they should do. And that had some impact. And that was something that I was a part of trying to make happen. That is, we call it, growing the grants, growing the movement, and building the movement and folks who were not trained in grant writing from the Ivy Leagues. I use the Ivy Leagues because there are certain things that I mean, in my analysis, easy to talk is like cran apple juice. How the hell did we ever need cran apple juice? We had apple juice and cranberries, and because consumers needed something more to buy, somebody come up with cran apple juice. It's like building organizations in the community that can deal with the problems. And if the problems become one of getting jobs, then people want to get paid. We saw that in the cultural movement. We definitely saw it among rappers, that we want to get paid. But getting paid didn't always help to build the sense of power, unity, and a voice and dignity in our communities. So nonprofits, they're waning now. You know, they were waxing in the 2000s and until recently, but they're waning now. You know, and that's part of the nature of the struggle, because I think more people in the nonprofit industry are realizing that this is not what we want. I don't know if that makes sense. I always wonder if it's making sense when I'm talking so much like this. So.
Only one way to find out. Apply the lessons.
Yeah.
So now, I know you said you have 2 hours, but unfortunately, I would love to, but I don't have 2 hours. Again, I want to try and tease out from you things that I want to do my part in amplifying your history, your struggle, your message. So, of course, we want people to check out the work, to check out the book. So I want to skip ahead now, because it doesn't make sense to go through the whole book. Y'all go buy the book, right? Okay. So I'm going to skip ahead, and I want to talk about, again, something that's near and dear to my heart: the struggle, the movement for justice for Oscar Grant. And in preparing for today's interview, let's see if I can share my screen. When I read the book, Jesse, you talked about the seed, or your initial, you had heard about Walter Riley, but for you did not actually meet him and begin to work with him until that struggle for justice for Oscar Grant. And in particular, there was this concern about, we know that there were major demonstrations in Oakland, rebellions in the street, anger, righteous indignation. Oh, I call it a murder of Oscar Grant, but at any rate. And there was some violence. So many times when people are broadcast and they say, I'm going to bring you this information, I don't condone violence. I'm not going to say I don't condone violence. You will never hear me say that. But at any rate, before I get on my soapbox, there was violence in the streets. And a lot of people began to state that, well, these are outsiders coming into Oakland. And Jesse, you referenced this open letter that Mr. Riley had put out. So I'm going through my emails the other night, and lo and behold, what do I see? I see an email from Donna Murch that was sent out. I forget what listserv I was on, but I got the email, and I also saw, because I'm a pack rat, I keep receipts, buried amongst my emails, I saw where I forwarded the same email to the Los Angeles Committee for Justice for Oscar Grant. After the verdict in the murder trial of the policeman who killed Oscar Grant, a call from Oakland attorney Walter Riley: don't put the outsider label on people who are standing up for justice and civil rights. The murder of Oscar Grant is a universal issue of justice and civil rights. I do not like this divisive campaign to divide our community and protesters by calling people outsiders. Oakland is not an isolated town in the desert. This is a great metropolitan area with people from all over, with a world-class university. We expect people from all over the map to participate in Oakland. Calling people outsiders in this instance is a political attack on the movement. The subtext is that the outsiders are white and not connected to Oakland. From the days of the civil rights movement to now, the outsider labeling failed to address the underlying problems for which people came together. For those whose frustration with progress leads them to violent protest, we must engage in respectful political struggle. I understand the frustration. I do not support destruction and looting as political protest. I adamantly object to calling our youth and political activists outsiders. I call upon everyone to push back against this tendency. And this is from, my date is July 11th of 2010. This is in the aftermath of the verdict of what I call the murder of Oscar Grant. But I want to go back here. Where is this? There we go. Calling people outsiders is a political attack on the movement. From the days of the civil rights movement to now, the outsider labeling failed to address the underlying problems for which people came together. So in addition to not addressing the issues, it's a political attack on a movement. I was not a participant in the civil rights movement of the late 60s, Black Power movement, etc. A lot of what I learned, I didn't have a lot of activists in my family. A lot of what I learned, like most people, is from books and or movies, documentaries. One of which was Eyes on the Prize, which I still appreciate for what it did. And it's almost seared into my brain. I don't remember which episode it was, but they caught this. I don't know if he was a sheriff. He may have been a sheriff. It wasn't Bull Connor. It wasn't the one in Selma, but it was somebody. I will never forget. This man said, "We never have any problems with our Southern niggas." He said niggas, not Negroes. "We never have any problems with our Southern niggas until folks from the NAACP and all these other ones come down here." Always blaming agitation, the stirring up of consciousness, etc., on people from the outside. And in this particular instance, with the movement for justice, the righteous movement of anger and indignation at the murder of Oscar Grant, in this specific instance, the label was directed towards a lot of, I will say, comrades who were white, who were not people of color, who were whose politics may have been anarchism. That these are the labels that have been thrown out, that were involved in the movement and being amongst the people during their righteous anger and indignation at this time around the murder of Oscar Grant. So this hit pretty hard for you, Jesse, I think. Am I correct?
This statement of Walter's, absolutely.
What was going on at the time, and being here in Los Angeles, like elsewhere, we saw the video. It affected us in a particular way, but y'all are right there in Oakland. Let's talk about that.
Well, and of course, the trial in this case was moved to Los Angeles County, and I know you were involved in covering it. But yes, right. Absolutely. What we saw in Oakland in kind of the public narrative response about what was happening in the streets was statements really in lockstep by the mainstream media, the police agencies, and some of the nonprofit leaders who were very publicly calling out these labels of these people who are coming to Oakland and breaking things are outside agitators and not welcome here. And, those of us who were in the streets in those nights know that those labels and those statements are overly broad and not exactly true. Many of the people who were in the streets protesting and participating in the uprising in response to the killing of Oscar Grant were people from Oakland. Many of those people were Black and brown. Many of those people in the streets were participating in all different types of ways. And not to mention that some of those kind of nonprofit organizers and leaders who were leading these public calls in lockstep with the police and the media were also newer to Oakland. So this statement landed really strongly for me, and it landed strongly for me and my other comrades at the time without even quite knowing Walter Riley's experience with this kind of labeling. I mean, you mentioned in this the reference to the civil rights movement, but what I learned in the process of writing this book with Walter was that the labeling of outside agitators goes much deeper, of course, for the movement, but also for him. Back in, and forgive me, I'm gonna get the year wrong, but was it perhaps 1961 to 1963, Walter, when he was leading the NAACP chapter in Durham, North Carolina as a young person, The Freedom Riders and Freedom Highways projects were making efforts led by CORE to come through the South. And much of the NAACP locally was not interested in that, was not interested in the outside agitators coming and agitating into their turf. Walter, as a young person, and again, forgive me if I don't remember the exact numbers, but something like a 17-year-old at the time as an NAA leader, pushed the organizers in Durham to welcome those agitators. And so when we talk about what it means to be an outside agitator, what we're really talking about is people who are invested in changing these systems, and people who do have who are impacted, but perhaps are impacted differently. But it's people who have a stake in these struggles. And we have a stake because we live in the same world together. And we need to change this world, because this world, as you know, you asked Walter earlier about racialized capitalism and why racial capitalism is a framework. But the reason that that's a framework is it affects every one of our lives. And Walter's life, of course, demonstrates how deeply that's embedded from, you know, growing up in a family that whose economic relationship within the Jim Crow apartheid system was at some point a relationship of tenant farming. And then you mentioned that his mother did work at some point in the home of this a variety of families, but one of them happened to be the former slave owning family whose descendants of that family are currently winning awards as police officers in the same city. The jail in that city is on South Mangum Street. It's named after that same slave owning family that is still currently a family, which of course at some point had either a congressman or a senator represented in Washington. So when we talk about the system of racialized capitalism and how we are all invested in it, and it is all of our responsibility to challenge, it means certainly those of us who are impacted in an immediate, direct way by something like police violence and the police killing, for example, in the case of Oscar Grant, but it also challenges us to fight that system because we are all impacted by it in every portion of our lives. And that means if we are motivated by the same injustices, that we need to work together and in concert, even if we have disagreements about how to participate together. So of course, there may be some group of people that are more focused on a form of political participation that includes breaking windows or burning down police stations, just as there are going to be people who are invested in political movements focused on advocacy at the legislative level. But the fundamental reason that Walter's statement at the beginning of our relationship really hit me around this challenge of the outside agitator framework is that it's not about throwing people who have different approaches under the bus. It's about seeing people who have different approaches and organizing together and pushing each other to move the movement forward. I think I'm going to leave that there.
Mr. Riley?
I think that's essential to building the movement. Understanding that it was important to say publicly that what people were doing in the streets is a result of the violence of a system, and their only way of responding at this time and being heard is responding in the way that they did. And that's been a constant struggle in the movement since I remember, certainly from the civil rights movement. It was certainly an aspect of the labor movement of the 30s and the 40s. How do you build a movement and drink tea with the bosses? You know, you can't do that.
Right.
The struggle in the civil rights movement was there were those forces who wanted to be the spokespeople for the Black community, and a lot of the young folk, and at that time being one of the young folk, I didn't think they had the language for dealing and representing the urgency of the moment. Some of those folks who wanted to be the representatives were more interested in maintaining the status quo because their position in the status quo was a lot better than it might be if the status quo changed, which is a lot of the struggle right now. That is not so different from what was happening during the Oscar rights struggle. You were there, and you know that some people were leaders because, or were accepted as leaders and spokesperson for our community and for our organizations because they agreed with the power structure in one way or the other, or they expressed the same language, or they were frightened by the folks who just didn't want to see things remain the same in the same way. There is history to this discussion as to whether or not there has ever been any change in the world without violence. That's a long discussion that has taken place. I've said that in various places. India didn't get the British off their back by nonviolence. There was a tremendous amount of violence in England, in India, that made the British understand that they could not just stay there in the manner they were doing. They chose to say that it was the nonviolence that led them to leave. And the same is true for the civil rights movement. There was a tremendous amount of violence, and that violence came from the other side, and there was resistance to it. But it was clear that Black folk and the folks who were fighting for civil rights, that were supporting the Black community, were prepared for and ready to defend themselves.
Right.
And knowing that the possibility of defense was an imminent aspect of the struggle, it made the system respond a lot quicker and a lot more urgently. Urgency doesn't come because we raise our voice. And we have to be aware of that. And we have to figure out what that strategy means. So how we engage in the struggles, or something that we engage with each other about, what those tactics and strategies might be. And we have to constantly figure out what it means to agree that we will allow diversity of tactics in our struggle. That's the strategic position. Diversity is an aspect of our struggle. Those folks who have tactics that are different from ours, that may be leading to attacking some aspect of the system or the entire system or the entire problem that we're having, have to be considered our allies, and we move forward together. It is much more critical now than ever, as we are seeing the violence of the state come down on us, and people calling for, and media calling for, you guys be cool. That was the term from the 60s, be cool, be cool. Chill wasn't as formal as it is now. Be cool was the line that came from various celebrities and individuals and folks who thought they were leading the movement. And that's something that people decided to push away from, after 2010 and across the country. But we still have folks that are doing it. We still have organizations that are doing it. And it helps to maintain their position of hegemony in the movement, perhaps. It helps to make them become more important. But for the masses of people, we have to figure out that our anger has to be accepted as real, as important, and legitimized.
Yeah, legitimized, yes.
And that means exactly. That exactly means that, and that we unite with the folks who understand it and have that. And that while at various times we have a different tactic, at any moment it changes, but we have to be ready for that change. And there are people historically who have said they are prepared to do certain kinds of actions, but in their actual practice and historically they don't do anything but try and keep other folks from engaging in struggle. That's one that we will have some struggles on. I've been, before the book, I've been on some talk shows that don't get, not talk shows, but podcasts that don't get a tremendous amount of publicity. And that's a discussion with a few people here. What do you mean when you say you're prepared to get down? But when getting down time comes, what you're prepared to do is criticize other folks.
Well, a lot of it's posturing, yeah. And a lot of it is activists as opposed to activists.
Oh, that's a term. All
Yeah,
right.
activist. Yeah, acting like.
And I think that's true. I think that's true. We've seen that. We've seen that. We've seen that in cultural forms where people call out that posturing or fronting approach.
Mhm,
It becomes part of the language.
mhm,
That's not to be part. The main aspect of our discussion is how we move forward together.
mhm,
But in that, we also have to recognize that there are differences that just need to be acknowledged. We don't have to solve them. Just accept that we have differences and that there is something much more important for us to do in moving forward together.
mhm.
If we could all be part of that struggle and the way that people seem to be united in Minneapolis, and we could build greater unity and say, let's go after this structure,
Mhm.
what would that mean? If they come for us in Los Angeles and come for us in Oakland, how we resist will determine whether or not we have a future for being able to survive as organizational groups and individuals in the struggle for our community, our humanity, and our lives. You know, the way we are being cited now, and our weakness is within our own level of solidarity, struggle.
Mhm. The lesson that I keep getting from you all loud and clear through this book: don't throw our comrades, our allies under the bus. The importance of building, maintaining relationships, and knowing we are all on the same side. And it reminds me of years ago when Barbara Ransby, who speaks very glowingly of you, when she did a book talk on her beautiful, wonderful biography of Ella Baker. She was in Atlanta, Georgia, and she said something that struck me so. She was talking about Dr. John Henrik Clarke's reminiscence, reminiscence, remembrance of Ella Baker and in Harlem, and how they would have these organizing meetings, and they would have a meeting and they would be hours long and it would be contentious, and as the elders say, knock down, stomp down, drag out meeting. And Dr. Clarke said you would see Ella Baker the next day on the street, and she would jaywalk and brave traffic, almost get hit by a car, to cross the street and give you a hug. And he said that hug was not in spite of the argument the previous night, it was
Because
because of the argument the previous night. He said it was because she recognized an ally and a comrade in the struggle. And so that is what I am picking up from your book, A Conversation with Walter Riley, Civil Rights and Structural Attacks. Thank you so much, Jesse Strauss, for the idea and approaching Mr. Riley. Thank you so much, Mr. Riley, for sharing your expertise and your thoughts. Uh, we do need a part two, because in the introduction, partly because in the introduction to the, or the forward to the book, your son Raymond, also known as Boots, talks about his development as an activist, his development in terms of his consciousness as an activist because of your work. So we need a part two. We also need to talk about your work with Haiti and your decision to become an attorney after all of these years of activist work. You can do a lot in 80 years, and you have done a whole heap of a lot. So we need to talk about that, but not today. Today, I'm going to let y'all return to your families and whatever else it was you were doing. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your example and for your work. And thank you for being on Rootwork today.
I want to thank you because I feel honored that you wanted to have us on to talk about this book. All that you do and all that you represent, and your voice is so important.
you so much.
So I feel indeed lifted up that you would want to be talking to us.
Thank you for such kind words. Thank you. I appreciate that, sir.
Thank you, Thandi. It's an honor to be on your show as a guest. And we've known each other in the world of journalism for many years now, but it's an honor to be in this space. And thank you for engaging in the political conversation today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the book is being distributed by AK Press. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So wherever you find your books, you will be able to find this wonderful offering. Thank you again so much, you all, for being on Rootwork today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I didn't see a whole lot of who shot John over in the chat. I guess y'all was actually paying attention, huh? Y'all was actually enjoying the interview, huh? Well, that's good. I'm glad to know that. As always, I hope that it has been informative and useful, that you could find something not just interesting, but something that you can use in your work, something that you could take away with you from being in the interview. So again, like, share, and subscribe. I think a lot of y'all liked the episode. So since you was hard-headed and didn't like it in the beginning, like it now. Share the link with somebody you know wasn't able to watch it live. And don't forget to subscribe. Matter of fact, why don't we do this? I try, as you know, because I talk about it so often, I try to interview other people so that I'm not just up here running my mouth, right? I don't do a whole lot of self-promotion. The videos in the beginning, which talk about my books, I just did those this year. You know, I've been in spaces where I've spoken before, and they was like, okay, Thandi, are you forgetting something? Huh? Didn't you write a book? Oh, yeah. And that's just something that I wouldn't say was inculcated in me, but as part of my activist upbringing, I don't always try to bring attention to myself, which is at a certain point in your life, you probably should toot your own horn, as they say. All these elder words of wisdom coming to me. It's a sorry pup that don't wag its own tail. So that's what these book trailers are that I intersplice throughout the show. I have written 5 books. If you could hook a sister up. But the point I'm trying to make here is, you see that little thing scrolling at the bottom that says Cash App, Venmo? Your girl had a birthday yesterday, July 19th. Now, I don't always do this. I know I don't always do this, so you can't just throw this up on me and say that I'll be doing this a lot. But if you appreciate the work that a sister been doing and the work that a sister wants to continue to do, if you appreciate a sister, if you're in a good mood, if you're a generous, charitable person, go ahead on and hook a sister up for her birthday. Cancer, July 19th. Hook a sister up with some Venmo, with some Cash App, all right? Let's say you can't afford the book. Or let's say you got too many books you ain't read yet. You don't want to add no more. You ain't got no room on your shelf. I get it. Hook a sister up for her birthday. Venmo, Cash App. You ain't got to worry about a thing. I will not turn down the amount. Go ahead on and send me $500 to $1,000. I promise you, it will not be left on read. It will not be ignored. I promise that I will take it. So now that I have allayed your fears, now that I've assured you ain't got to worry about it no more, go ahead on and send it and hook a sister up. All right? So yeah, as usual, it is now 6:38 p.m. LA time. That means it's 9:38 p.m. on the East Coast. For all you middle people, 8:30, 7:30, etc. Monday evening. Thank you so much for hanging out with me on a Monday evening. First day of the work week. I'm going to let you enjoy the rest of your evening. Go ahead on and be with your family. Do your homework. help your children with their homework, decompress from work, or get ready to go to bed so that you can get up and go to work tomorrow. But thank you for putting up with the technical difficulties. Greatly, again, appreciate you sticking through the interview with Walter Riley, and just know and understand that it is my plan to bring you more interviews with elder activists in our struggle, as well as current activists in our struggle. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead on and get up out of here. Oh, my bad. Hold on. Let me give you some acknowledgement. Great show. Thank you so much. Well, thank you. Bear Day. You mean Earth Day? Bear Day. Anyway. Thank you so much. Great interview. Glad you enjoyed it. I agree. Wonderful to hear from the elders. We got to hear from the elders. Zen, I will gladly pay you Friday. Why does that not surprise me? What? Yes, my birthday. Because, like I said, I don't always promote myself. I don't always do that. Hey, decolonizing, you appreciate my work? Words are meaningless. Show me. Venmo, Cash App. Yes, Jack. Jock. Yeah, support them. Buy the book. Should buy everybody's book before they burn them all. You know what I'm saying? Appreciate that. Appreciate it. What would y'all say the lesson of this conversation was? What are you taking with you? Yeah. Good question for y'all. Tandy Show is the best on BLM. Well, you know what? I'm not going to argue with you. I know some people who will argue with you. I won't be one of them. So let's just leave it at that. You are very welcome, Terry. Hey, Josh. Thank you. John Brown soul. John Brown has some soul, huh? Okay. Man, listen. Ella Baker going into the bars, the barber shops, and the pool halls, which were predominantly, not all, but predominantly male spaces. But more so than that, it was a particular class of people that hung out in them spaces. And we know Uncle Roy, as Malcolm would call him, Uncle Roy Wilkins of the NAACP. Yeah, they was on that respectability bull. They was on that respectability bull, which is also a good lesson for us to learn. If you are a part of an organization right now today that proclaims to be about liberation, that proclaims to be a Black people, look around your organization and see, are there some people who are considered to be undesirable? And if so, why? Because certainly you don't want a bunch of rapists and abusers of women and abusers of people and other beings to be in your organization. I don't think. But other than that, if they are about Black people, but they do not, or let's say if a certain demographic is missing, why is that? Is it an oversight in organizing? Or is it because they don't believe that those people should be there? That's something you can take with you from today. Uh-oh. I must be talking to your physical. What are you talking about? Anyway. Need to read Barbara Ransby evidently. So listen, I'm going to be doing some new African text for Black August, Sanyika Shakur's Stand Up, Struggle Forward, and Safia Bukhari's The War Before. But it is so many books that I am behind on reading. And I mean from cover to cover. A lot of times I'll just get snippets from a book that I need for something and keep it moving. But reading a book from cover to cover, it's been a while since I've done that. And I am holding out. I'm gonna say I'm boycotting, but I'm holding out on Audible, on audiobooks, even though I have friends that tell me it helps them cut down the time. I still like to get the physical book. I still feel bad because I have not read the book. There are so many books that need to be gone over. And you know, in Black August, we talked about the brothers who created Black August in the California prison system talked about the importance of collective study. I'm thinking about just getting on here and reading certain books. Maybe if I can't sleep at 3 a.m. one night, I'm just going to get up here and read some books. And if y'all want to chime in with me, read them with me, or comment or what have you, have something to add to the discussion, you're going to be welcome to it. But I'm thinking about doing that. I'll keep you posted upon what I decide. All right. So, may I join your next show to talk about black on black crime? No, you cannot, because there's no such thing as that. You sound like a troll. And guess where you about to go? Guess where you just went? Yeah. Cornfield. All right, y'all. I'm starting to ramble. Let me get on up out of here. Y'all enjoy your evening. Thank you again so much for joining me today. Stay safe. I'll holler at you later. Peace.
Nothing in Deborah Jones's formative years could have prepared her for life in the US organization. Like many of her generation, she was black and proud before the phrase became popular. She believed and still believes in the principles for which the organization stood. But her life took a horrific turn on Mother's Day 1970, leaving her in trauma and in silence. In this never-before-told account, Deborah Jones's inspiring story is told. What We Stood For: The Story of a Revolutionary Black Woman, by Deborah Jones and Thandisizwe Chimurenga, is the compelling and harrowing memoir of one woman's experiences in a leading Black Power organization.
Black Liberation Media is a collective of Black and African organizers, journalists, academics, and media personalities serving Black and African masses seeking to further grow in their understanding of themselves, their histories, and the African world through entertainment and news. Please continue to like, subscribe, and donate to the channel so we can further serve you and liberate our people. You can also go to blkliberationmedia.org, get some merchandise, and also become a Patreon member and a member from the YouTube. Please do what you can, share, and show your love as we will show ours for you. Black Liberation Media.